Bucknutters? Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Wednesday, September 11th, 2019. I am Dave Biddle, very happy to be joined by the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. We all know what happened 18 years ago in this country, and it'll never be forgotten. It never should be forgotten. I just wanted to start the show off just by just letting everybody know that we remember what happened that day, and our heart still goes out to everybody that was affected. We were all affected as Americans, so this day will always have special significance in our country. Ohio State football will always have special significance. It's trite to compare it to that day, but let's move on and talk Ohio State football backs. Justin Fields, there's so much to like about him. I think my favorite attribute might be his poise. I mean, when I was a kid and coaches would say stuff like, or you hit stuff on TV like sports is 90% mental and 10% physical. I'd be like, well, that's a bunch of nonsense. And the older I get, the more I believe that. Maybe not 90-10, but Justin Fields, because he's got all the physical attributes, but his poise reminds me a lot of Dwayne Haskins in that respect. Just, what are you seeing out of Justin Fields, and do you agree maybe his poise is, one of his best attributes?
Yeah, I would agree on that. I think mentally Justin Fields is a pretty tough kid. It's a good reason as to why he's ahead of where both of us believed he would be 2 weeks into the season. I know that most observers expected Justin Fields to get to this level eventually, but it's hard to see him improving because he's already so good. It's not like, he could do this better. He's got to be more careful with the football. Or, no, he's making the reads. He's making good decisions. He's not turning the ball over. He's scoring touchdowns. I mean, if you want to nitpick about how much better he can get, you're talking about maybe a little bit more in the run game. He'll keep the ball, but that's kind of strategic to keep him from running too much. I think it's very clear his preparation has been there. And that aspect of not just sports but life is a critical factor. You do the mental work to prepare yourself. You get yourself just ready to go ahead of time, and you're in a much better position to succeed. It goes back to the whole thing about sports is a metaphor for life, right? And usually the more prepared person, the person who wants it more, is going to have a better chance to win. I am very impressed with what we've seen so far with Fields. And I know that over the course of the summer, every time somebody wanted to talk about Justin Fields, I'd kind of wave it off like, yeah, we know he's going to be the starter, whatever, right? It's hard not to talk about him now because he's been as good as any quarterback in the country through 2 weeks. And if that's the level of play and the continued level of preparation we're going to see from him, then it's hard to see anybody on the schedule outside of maybe a Wisconsin hanging with this team because Fields clearly has this team operating at a very high level at a very early point in the year.
Yeah, he's way ahead of not way ahead. He's ahead of where I thought he would be in his development. It's not like he's light years ahead. I thought he'd be good, but he looks great. And, it's still a small sample size. I keep pointing that out, but still, football is not as we all know, it has the most condensed season of any, the fewest amount of games of any sport we follow. We're already 1/6 of the way through the regular season, so you can look at it two ways. You can say, well, it's very early, small sample size, or 2 games in football, you learn a lot, and I think we've learned a lot. Buckeye running backs, what do you make of the situation? J.K. Dobbins looked good, looked a lot better than the opener. I think they probably lit a fire under his rear end in practice, and I thought Master Teague looked good. Master Crowley. That'd be funny if we had 2 Masters on the team. Marcus Crowley's, there was a lot of hype about him in camp, and I think he's looked good backs, but I think it's just, right now they're going to go with, obviously, Dobbins and Teague, and they're going to mix Demario McCall in. Just what do you make of the running back situation after 2 games?
Well, first of all, if we're screwing up his first name, it should be Mr. Crowley, okay? Then he can have his own Aussie intro. But I think the running back situation it's much more interesting than I expected because I've been a huge fan of Demario McCall. I don't think we're going to see him not play a role in this offense, but it's hard to deny how good Master Teague's been when he's gotten in there. And he's kind of the guy in camp we didn't talk about because he was always hurt, and we kind of like, all right, so much for him, right? He's 2 straight games when he's got on the field. He's ran hard. He's ran well. He looks like a guy who could be a significant contributor. I think we have to feel really good about the depth on this OSU team right now at the tailback position because obviously Dobbins played a significantly better game against UC than he did against Florida Atlantic. He hit the correct holes. You saw him running people over. I was very pleased with what we saw from Dobbins in the UC game. But Master Teague's a guy who's got that whole package, right? And he's a player that we've talked about for a while of, man, if he gets on the field, he was a really highly touted kid. He's got that 4.3 speed according to the spring running times. He's a player who could do it all. If anybody is your traditional bell cow back on this roster right now, it's Master Teague. And we've seen flashes from him in 2 games that he could be a darn effective guy. So as a number 2, yes, he's not going to get as many carries as Dobbins, but he's the kind of guy, if something happens to JK, you'd feel pretty reasonable right now about carrying the load. On top of that, like you said, Craig's a guy who has potential to be a good player in certain situations, certainly going to be a good one down the line. You got a guy like Steel Chambers, who we saw get up the field, and that was a good thing. And on top of it, we still have Run DMC, who this year is going to make a critical play. And I don't know if it's going to be coming out of the backfield. I don't know if it's going to be hitting a big home run. My guess might be even returning a kick. But I think I just mentioned 4 who are very capable tailbacks on this roster. And before, we were worried you didn't have 2. So I think OSU's tailback situation's in really good hands. And I think we're going to see a lot of those guys get some more run these next 2 weeks because they're games that aren't going to be that close.
Baron Browning, is it time to get excited about Baron Browning in your mind?
Yeah. I hadn't seen him play one good game in his entire career before this season. Now I've seen him play 2 good ones in a row. To me, that's a very clear change. Not only is it a new defense, it's a new coaching staff, but Baron Browning doesn't look like he's sitting out there trying to do a math problem before he goes after the football. Like, he's reacting. He's playing like a football player. And with his copious physical abilities, there's a reason the kid was the number 1 linebacker in the country, right? He looks like a big-time football player these first 2 games. And I can't tell you how excited I am about that. And he's a guy that both you and I have been saying for a while. We weren't really sure what to think of him, whether he was going to be a good middle linebacker, yada, 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 yada. Well, when the defense was made a lot more simple here, the scheme changed. Baron Browning is all of a sudden not out there trying to make sure he has one of 74 assignments covered. He's just playing football, and he looks great doing it. So I'm in on the Baron Browning hype train. I'm also in on the Pete Werner hype train. He's a guy who I thought struggled a lot last year. And it's amazing how much better he looks with a more simplified scheme and better coaching. I mean, it's hard to figure out what the problem was last year. Wait, no, it isn't. You change the coaching staff, you have the exact same players, you have significantly improved performance, you know what the problem was. I think the linebackers for OSU this year are looking way better. And that's a great sign for this defense continuing to move back towards being one of the best in the country.
Big Ten opener at Indiana on Saturday. Any concerns at all?
Well, Indiana's a team that, when Kevin Wilson was there, was always very scary. Now, I know a lot of us are still scarred by a couple of those games that were way too close for comfort. On the flip side, Indiana has not beaten Ohio State since Ronald Reagan was president. So I think your cause for concern is very low. IU's not horrible. They have an outside chance to get to 6-6 this year. They had a nice game last week, beating up on a cupcake opponent. The first week of the season, they played Ball State a little tight, and then they ended up winning, so they're 2-0. In general, the Big Ten this year, even the bottom-level teams look pretty good, but Indiana's not on the same plane as OSU. I think Indiana's not even as good as Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati would beat Indiana, and it would be a good game, but I think Indiana would lose to them. So for us, this is going to be interesting because it's a first test for Fields on the road. Even though the crowd's going to be 80% OSU fans, it's still different routine. It's staying in a hotel. It's all that whole process of preparation away from your comfort zone. On top of that, it's a conference game, so there's a little more importance placed on it. And thirdly, how do they react to success? We saw in the first game, after they had a ton of success in the first quarter, we had a significant letdown. And the team struggled the last 3 quarters against FAU. We saw a complete game last week. But is this team going to have the maturity to show up and take care of business like an elite team should? Or are they going to mess around and win 45-28? That's the big question to me. Is OSU going to go out and win 50-10 and show that they're a focused team that's ready to take care of business every week? Or are they going to go out and show that maybe there's some maturity issues and win 45-28? And if they have one of those games that's yay, we won, but it's not like perfect. It's one of those games that the OSU fans who want us to win every game 50-0 are spitting in fury because you only win by 17. Then guess what? There is potential at that point for me to believe that this team may not be as mentally mature as they need to be. And down the line, the potential for a letdown game may be there. But if they go out and they lay a smackdown and they take care of business and come back home with a solid, strong win, kind of like what we saw against Cincy, then it's going to tell me that this team's mental preparation is where it needs to be a great team on a consistent basis. And they will need that starting in October because OSU right now has more ranked opponents left on its schedule than any team in America with 5. So, yeah, this game itself in a vacuum is not a big deal. But this game inside of the big picture is a much bigger deal. And that's the stuff I'm going to be most interested to see is which way does OSU take care of business? Because no matter what, in my mind, they're coming back from Bloomington with a W.
Michigan looked awful against Army. Now, Army is good, but Michigan, perennial, overrated. This year looks no different. That they vastly overrated. Just your thoughts on what you've witnessed from the Wolverines.
I'm so disappointed Army didn't beat them. It was like watching a Michigan bowl game, right? My rule for any time they play in a bowl game is I just kind of watch what happens. I always have a good outcome, right? Because if they win, then all right, well, good for the Big Ten. But if they lose, it's hilarious, right? So this is one that I know me and a lot of other people have been talking about since the summer. Oh, Army's going to upset them. Army's going to upset them. And my goodness, Army should have upset them. I have to say, through 2 weeks, Shea Patterson has 5 fumbles. Their offense looks no different. I don't care what they did in camp. It's clear Harbaugh's not comfortable doing anything other than running the football between the tackles. And on that team, nothing's changed. Nothing has changed whatsoever. And right now, I think Wisconsin drills them in 2 weeks. Wisconsin's come out of the gates looking awesome. It's 110-0 in 2 games for them. Michigan's bumbling by scrub team week 1. And then week 2, they're trying to give the game to an admittedly decent Army team. Now, let me say one other thing here. Everybody's going to compare that to Oklahoma a year ago, where Army took Oklahoma to overtime as well. That's a big difference. Army in that Oklahoma game possessed the ball the entire time. Oklahoma scored on like 3 out of 4 or 5 possessions. Michigan fumbled the ball away repeatedly against Army, but their defense did a reasonable job slowing down Army. It wasn't like Army held the ball for 14 out of 15 minutes, right? Michigan's offense just stunk. That game did not need to go to overtime. And to Army's credit, they forced double overtime. And I'll tell you what, that Michigan O-line does not look good. They had one play where Shea Patterson fumbled the ball, where their left tackle got turnstiled by a skinny little 6'1" guy. What's going to happen when you got Tyreek Smith or Chase Young coming around the corner on that one? Michigan looks like they're going to have a rough year. I mean, 8-4 kind of rough if something doesn't change with that offense. And candidly, what more do you expect from the most overrated team every single damn year for the last 15 years? Nothing's changed in Ann Arbor, and nothing will change as long as Harbaugh's there. He's not anything more than – he's going to end up being their Earl Bruce, 9-3 every year. That's what's going to happen with Jim Harbaugh. And that's fine because they'll have no way to fire him. It's whenever he decides he wants to go back to the NFL. And until then, he'll do the same thing and he'll lose to OSU every year. And to me, at this point, the game's a foregone conclusion on the OSU schedule. I'm a lot more concerned about other games that we have coming up instead of that one.
Let's close the show with some quick recruiting talk. Buckeyes picked up the number 3 inside linebacker in the country in the 2021 class yesterday, Reid Carrico from Ironton, Ohio. They're now 3rd in the country. The Buckeyes are in the 2021 class. They have 5 commitments. And for those that are wondering, they're 4th in the 2020 class with 22 commitments. So the beat goes on for recruiting. But the Buckeyes getting Reid Carrico, not a surprise, but still really good, Bax.
Yeah, there was a little scuttlebutt about Clemson. Apparently somebody who went to his high school in the past was a former Clemson Tiger. But in the end, Ironton is an Ohio State town. It's kind of like Dayton. It's an OSU town, right? And I can't say I'm surprised, but I am excited. And if you look at what's going on next year in the state of Ohio, it's one of the strongest years for recruiting in Ohio in a long time. There's a lot of top-end talent in next year's class. And right now OSU has 4 of the top 4 or 5 in Ohio already locked up. That's the kind of thing you want to see in a year where Ohio is way up. Like, I think the preliminary ratings have something like 10 4-star kids in Ohio next year already, and they're going to find a few more when it's all said and done. So right now that recruiting class is 4 of the top 5 kids in Ohio and Kyle McCord, who was their top choice for quarterback in the entire country. That's a darn good start for Ryan Day's second, I guess, full year as a recruiter, right? And, yes, it's a foregone conclusion, but those of you who know your history know this is not a small deal, right? Because if you don't know your history in the Cooper years, then you are condemned to repeat it, where the best players in Ohio left the state of Ohio, and Ohio State was burned by it. Ohio State is not losing the best players in Ohio. They have not under Tressel. They have not under Meyer. And as next year shows, they are not under Ryan Day either. And that's really what you have to expect from any OSU recruiting class. And I know the playbook's changed a little bit in recruiting from the past. In the past, it used to be get all the best Ohio kids and grab a couple kids from outside the state. Now it's get the absolute elite Ohio kids. Instead of the top 12, you get the top 7 or 8. And then you go and you load up from the rest of the country because recruiting's become more national. But you still have to make sure that those best kids here stay here. And Reid Carrico is a kid who grew up a Buckeye. He grew up wanting to be a Buckeye, right? And the fact that he's an elite recruit and it pairs with his, family raising him to be a Buckeye is perfect. He's the kind of guy that we're going to love for years, right? He has an A.J. Hawk kind of career written all over him. So I'm very excited about this commitment. It's a great sign for things to come with OSU. And in the end, the machine keeps humming. And that's the biggest thing with the Ryan Day transition is everything else going to keep continuing the way that was so successful under Urban, right? Our big picture of Ryan Day was he's a little smilier. He's a little more offensively dynamic at this point in time than Urban was. But you want everything else to stay the same because Urban was awesome. And, keeping kids like Carrico just shows that Ryan Day is carrying over many of the system pieces that have made the OSU program the best in the Midwest and one of the best in the entire country.
Great stuff, as always, from the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. I appreciate it, Bax, and thanks to our listeners out there for tuning into the show. Hope everyone has a great day. Let's try that Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land.